In China, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on an official visit, America's top diplomat met his Chinese counterpart Wang in Beijing yesterday. The two discussed a range of topics from the wars in Gaza and Ukraine to U.S. sanctions on Chinese firms and even Beijing's claim over the island of Taiwan. Now, this is Secretary Blinken's second trip to China in less than a year, and the first since the in-person meeting between President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in November of last year. Secretary Blinken began his trip with a day-long stop in Shanghai, where he interacted with China's business community. However, Secretary Blinken was given a cold welcome in Beijing, with his Chinese counterpart making some rather undiplomatic comments on bilateral relations.
But the China-US relationship is facing more negative factors and all kinds of disruptions. China's legitimate development rights have been unreasonably suppressed, and our core interests are facing challenges. Should China and the US keep to the right direction of moving forward with stability, or should we return to a downward spiral?
The Chinese foreign minister also warned the United States against interfering in China's internal matters and sovereignty, which includes Beijing's claim on Taiwan.
China's requests are always consistent. We always call for respecting each other's core interests and urge the United States not to interfere in China's internal affairs, not to hold China's development back. Do not interfere with China's sovereignty, safety, development, and not to step on China's red lines on sovereignty.
Meanwhile, Secretary Blinken advocated for more active diplomacy between the two nations and did avoid any miscalculations as the U.S.-China ties witness a historic low.
But in Beijing, the President asked me to travel back to work on moving forward on the agreements that our two presidents reached in San Francisco at the end of last year. Resuming cooperation on counter-narcotics, restarting our military-to-military conversations, looking together at the future of artificial intelligence, its risks, safety issues, and trying to strengthen our people-to-people connections, but also, critically, managing responsibly our differences. Moving forward on the agenda that our President set requires active diplomacy, and there's no substitute in our judgment for face-to-face diplomacy in order to try to move forward, but also to make sure that we're as clear as possible about the areas where we have differences, at the very least, to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid miscalculations. That really is a shared responsibility that we have, not only for our own people, but for people around the world, given the impact that the relationship between our countries has around the world.
The two senior diplomats held bilateral talks that lasted nearly 6 hours, calling them extensive and constructive. Secretary Blinken also met Chinese President Xi Jinping to address the growing range of differences between the two global economic powers. And Xi Jinping has warned Washington against crossing the red line by supporting Taiwan. The Chinese president also said the two countries should work together as partners and not as rivals. Secretary Blinken's trip to China comes amid the backdrop of the United States promising more military aid to Taiwan and potentially banning the Chinese social media app TikTok nationwide. Now, it remains to be seen if Secretary Blinken's trip to China will improve relations between Washington and Beijing. But what we do know is the Biden administration remains committed to both continuing and open dialogue with Beijing, even if major differences persist. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on First Post America.